Well, here we are. And this is part 2 of our little series I'm going to be doing on Footrims and how to use Footrims in helping you guide you to date Chinese porcelain. Originally, when I was going to do this, this is sort of an update of a series of videos I did years ago. I was going to try and do the 18th and 19th century in one video and show a whole bunch of Footrims. I realized when I got done gathering images, it was going to be much, much too long. And so I'm breaking it down. This is only going to be for 19th century Chinese ceramics and Footrims and enamels and glazes. We're going to go through a whole variety of them. I put together 60 or 70 photographs, and we've already done the one on fakes of the 20th century, and now we're going to talk a bit about the 19th century. And from there, we'll go into we'll do a third video on the 18th century and their transitional period and so forth. So we're going to sort of lay it out that way. So this is going to be part 2. And if you missed the first video on fakes, I recommend you go look at that before you look at this, because it'll fill in some holes for you visually. Because one of the real tricks out there today, obviously, is examining Chinese ceramics that are turning up on the market, because there are so many copies of incredible rarities that were they authentic, they'd be worth a fortune. And it's one of these things that's hard to get your brain around. But it would be like if you found a painting that was signed by Monet, would you believe it to be a Monet? And the chances are you wouldn't. But for some reason, folks, when they see Chinese ceramics and it has a Qing mark on it or a certain Ming mark or something like that, there's all this hope that it's going to be authentic. And I can just tell you that very, very, very rarely are they authentic, unless you're getting it from the pieces coming from a major dealer or collector, or through an auction house with a good reputation for dating and authenticating things. So you always want to keep that in mind, and also keep in mind always that they didn't make anywhere near as much porcelain in the Republic period as they claim today are Republic. Whenever you see a really slick piece of Marken period appearing porcelain and they're being sold at an auction somewhere with a whole bunch of other really slick pieces and it says Republic period, run for your life. It's most likely a fake, because they didn't make that many high quality copies in the Republic period that look like Qinglong vases. They did them occasionally. There were a few forms that they did. We'll talk about some of them, but in general they didn't. And most of the examples that are out there today floating around, unless they're specific to Republic period artists and even they're copied today, you're not likely to come out ahead of the game. We'll put it that way. You're going to lose money. All right. And if it's at a bargain basement price, always run away. There's no such thing as a bargain basement price in the Asian art business, unless you've been doing it for a long time and you get lucky and you find something. Because as I said in the video a couple weeks ago, the more you know, the less money you need to buy things. Because there's a lot of stuff out there that slips through, and I've had that good fortune a number of times. But it takes a long time. That's all. It's just a lot of practice. Anyway, so we're going to start with this. This is a piece of porcelain, second half of the 19th century with the Wang Shu Pu decoration. I've talked about these before, but only because the market is now being flooded with copies of these, because they've come up so much in value in the last few years. These jars and pots and so forth with this pattern, which is the 40 great Chinese heroes of Chinese culture, the 40 heroes, and they identify them with calligraphy and so forth. They've always been around. In the 1980s and 90s, you could buy a cup and saucer set with the most beautiful Wang Shu Pu decoration you've ever seen for about $40. And suddenly they became very, very popular, and now these pieces have gone up in value. The vases now sell for thousands of dollars, when they used to sell for 50 or 60 or 100, 150, something like that. They were very, very reasonable. The market has discovered them, and they're very expensive. So this is a real example, second half of the 19th century. Very nice colors. Always look at the colors. The enamels are pure and clean. The blue is nice. The facial expression, always look at the faces. Study faces on Chinese porcelain, how they're done. They go a long way to helping you date things. And you have this beautiful gilt crown on her head and so forth, and the way the robes flow. And then there's the little touches, like this very delicate ink work that's been added here. And then the underglazed blue, of course, was applied prior to the piece being fired with colored enamels. The underglazed blue is done, and then the colored enamels are added. So they have to be very careful where they put the underglazed blue, because they're going to come back afterwards and add the figure. All right, so all these little characteristics. And here you have this nice little foulon sitting on top of a box with calligraphy and so forth. And here's the foot rim, and that's what the foot rim should look like. Notice first is this particular one, and there are different varieties. They don't all look like this. These were not turned out in one factory, or they all come out the same every time. So you always have to keep in mind variables. But you've already looked at the front. You know the colors look pretty good, and now you've got the bottom of it, and you're looking at it. And what do you see? You see a sloped outer foot rim that goes up and then rolls over. This is all unglazed, obviously, and then goes down here to this spot here. You can see it best, and then it's just a vertical drop to the bottom of the jar, and then the jar itself is slightly convex. Sometimes they're very flat, sometimes they're concave. Often they're convex because of the weight of the clay during the firing causes it to sag just a little bit. They don't sag so much that they need to put spurs under them to hold them up like they do with Japanese ceramics, but there is a little bit of a sag there. But notice the texture of the clay. It's very, very nice clay. It's slightly slightly tan in color, and there was a little bit of iron in the clay, and that's why you have this red line here where the glaze meets the unglazed area, and it oxidized a little bit in the kiln. And sometimes you see a lot of this, sometimes you see a little of it. It can vary wildly, but it's there, and sometimes it appears on modern pieces too, but not as common. The clay they use today tends to be a lot cleaner, though every once in a while you'll see a piece that flashes a little iron, a little rust from the kiln, and I think at times they actually add a little bit of iron to it in rusty water to the bottoms to help them oxidize up. But this is what it should look like. It's like a mountaintop that's sloping on the front and then fairly steep down the back and goes this way. That's one of the foot rims you'll see. And then over here to this, the hat stand. This is on eBay right now. It's a nice hat stand. The guy has sold a couple of these. And the first thing you always want to do is go in and look at the shape and the form. What does it have that it should have? Well, it's a hat stand, obviously. It's got the vent holes in it are nicely done. There's a bit of raised clay going around the outside for the opening, which you should see. The facial expressions are very, very nice. Lots of little tiny strokes forming the eyebrows and the eyelashes and the beard and the nose. And he's smiling down at his goat. And up here you have a gentleman holding a brush, and he's apparently painting this dragon on a wall someplace. He looks like he's trying to paint the dragon, or painting the dragon on there. And again, lots of little details. Notice the robe details. Always pay attention to the little details, the things you don't expect. It's easy to glance over. But when you look at his robes, you'll notice how much work the artist put into his clothing. You have all these lines that have been added, and sort of cloud figures, and the way the folds of the robe go, and all this. On the reproductions, they often skip a lot of that, and it's sort of blurry and indifferent work. But here it's fairly nicely done, a little bit of calligraphy about it, and then you have this slightly thickened rim that's been glazed, and then you have all this ink work of the dragon. Notice the expression on the dragon's face. He's sort of smiling and laughing. He's descending. It's a descending dragon. They're usually descending or ascending, one or the other. And then you have the bottom of it, and here it is. It has got a Qing mark on it. It's very nicely trimmed. It's actually very crisply trimmed. Sometimes they're done better than others. Whoever finished this one, you'll notice how well this is done through here. Very nice job trimming the foot rim on this. Some pieces are not so well trimmed. This one is particularly well done. The foot's got, you can see the little trim marks for each little cut and so forth. You do not want to see lines going across the foot, like over here or here. Sometimes when they're doing fakes of these, they will rake the tool across the foot, causing lines to cross it in parallel. If you see that, be very, very suspicious right away. All right, but this is what it should look like. It's a little bit creamy in color. It's an old foot. It's 150 years old at this point. If you cleaned this with oven cleaner or a heavy cleaner and put it on there, it would probably whiten up quite a bit. But this is what it looks like after 150 years. But I want you to pay close attention to the texture and shape and trimming of that foot. All right, and then you come over to this. This is one of these, I call them flounder plates. It's a type of plate they did make in China during the second half of the 19th century for the export market. And obviously the rim on it is the sort of the ground decoration that you often see on rose medallion and rose mandarin and rose canton wares. And in this one, they dropped a fish into the middle of it. So it technically The dating on this you would probably put in the second half of the 19th century, around 1880. And if you pull it in, always pay attention to the decorative work, the area here, all this work in here, because on the early examples they spent a lot of time on them. And as time went on, in the 19th century progressed, there was pressure to turn out more and more and more of these rose medallion, rose mandarin, and rose canton dinner services, and the workmanship, the details started to diminish. They started to pay less attention to it, but they still did interesting patterns, all right? And they did interesting things, but you'll notice here the work is a little muddy looking. The rose medallion, the familial rose here is a little muddy looking. The yellow is a little too yellow. The colors are just slightly off. And then when you flip the piece over, what do you see? You see that same foot, basically the basic trim style is the same as it was on the Wang Shu Pu vase. It's got an outward slope and then goes to the center and drops down. Now this is the foot rim on a dish, so there's not as much real estate to work with, where some of the glaze might come up on the inside of the foot a little, but you can see it, and you have all this kiln grit in here. And kiln grit does appear on export wares from time to time. That's why whoever owned this plate before put little felts on here to lift it up just slightly off a tabletop so it didn't scratch it, because these will scratch a table. These will absolutely, it's like sandpaper. They will absolutely scratch stuff. Often people hang these on walls and do them and display them that way, or put them on in a dining room cabinet standing on stands, so the scratchy bottoms aren't a problem. But if you were using this on a nicely finished dinner table, you definitely want to have the felts on there. But notice the kiln grit, but notice the slope of that foot, that wide foot, and then there's that edge, and it drops into the plate, and there you have it. All right. And then moving along over, this is just another example of the same plate, it's sort of a detail of it. And again, lots of kiln grit. And kiln grit doesn't necessarily mean it's always late 19th century. I've seen kiln grit on first half of the 19th century's pieces too. But the decoration on the front of the first half of the 19th century pieces, especially in export wares like rose mandarin and rose medallion, rose canton and all that, is much finer. The work is much finer, the colors are brighter. And then you have this. Now this is a late 19th, early 20th century moon flask. It was one of a pair that was sold, I think Freeman's or somebody had this. And it's a very nice example, very typical of the 1890s to the end of the period, 1908, 1909, in that era. Very nicely done. Those of you who've been collecting for any length of time will recognize this work without flipping it over. You'll say, yeah, that's late 19th century work. But if you're sort of new to this, pay close attention to the color, the hue, the way it's drawn, and so forth. All right, because they made these moon flasks going back to the Ming Dynasty. They've been making moon flasks, very popular, and they still are. The Qing period, they made lots of them for the emperor. Loved moon flasks, but this is an example. And as I said, there are two of these. These are a bannerman going in through a gate, being followed by some people who appear to be celebrating rather wildly. And when you flip this over, this as what they sort of a badly done foot, but they did turn out this way sometimes. You'll notice it's rather thick. It's burnt looking. And there is a little iron oxide line here on the top, and it's rather crude and dirty. And that did happen, especially if they didn't clean the clay particularly well. They may have gotten a batch of clay because they know they're going to white glaze it, and white glaze covers a lot of sins. And under here you see what the clay looked like. Now some of this may clean off with a little bit of oven cleaner or heavy detergent, but a lot of it won't. But I want you to look at the way it's done, and the sort of thickness of it, but also the way it's trimmed, the way it's finished, where they never applied any glaze. And you see along here, it's a little bumpy and rough and so forth. And then over here on the inside, you do have that orange area showing on the inside of the foot, even where the white glaze is, of iron oxide again. All right. So if you see this kind of a foot, it doesn't necessarily mean it's new. It just is just one that wasn't done particularly well, because there were thousands of kilns, and a lot of them, there was not a lot of quality control sometimes on the finish of things. They were trying to, especially as the Qing Dynasty came to an end, the Republic period began, there was a lot of turmoil among the ceramic artists, and they ended up, some kilns closed, other kilns were absorbed by larger kilns and so forth. The Qing Porcelain Company was acquired a number of kilns that way in around 1915 or so, 1915 to 1920. But at any rate, this is a nice example of a rather crudely done foot on a nice moon flask. Now this is an interesting thing. Last week when I was talking about rose medallion porcelains and rose mandarin wares, I said, well, if you see a rain mark on the bottom of it, a red rain mark stamped into it, put it down because you know it's going to be a copy from the 1980s, and they are. But I was digging around because it occurred to me I had seen a pair of vases once that had an underglazed blue mark on them. And I went digging and digging and digging. And eventually, I found it, and it was this. This is the pair of vases. I had them. I had saved them actually on a drive, and I went and dug them out. And this is a nice pair of rose. I didn't get them that long ago. I think maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago I found these. But I wanted to show them because these are rose medallion, obviously. Mid 19th century, maybe 1840s, very, very nicely done, very nice colors and so forth, all the way down 1840 to 1850, I guess would be the safest thing to say. They were pretty good size. They were 22 inches in height. And here's a detail of it. And again, it's a great example because you can look at the hair. You can see all the details. The colors are nice because the green is very attractive. This very lovely green that's layered on here goes from dark to lighter and lighter. There's often a very nice yellow. And then you have this rust ground. And you see how this is done on the modern copies. They never get this right. They always screw that up. And then this very rather nice, almost lemon yellow, but not quite. Behind this on this balustrade, but when you flip the piece over, that's what you get. And this is interesting because this is a Xuande Ming mark, and clearly it's not Ming. And the only thing I can theorize on how this happened was whoever was making this, because I have seen this mark done almost identically on domestic Chinese porcelain from this period, from the 19th century. This is how they did them. And my feeling is that whoever this workshop was, it might have been a fairly large workshop, and they were producing lots of pieces, and somebody was working there, and their job was to put marks on things, and not knowing that they generally didn't put them on there. I think somebody just grabbed this vase and he threw a couple of Ming marks on there because he was the Ming mark guy. And because there'd be no reason to do it, and it certainly wasn't going to fool anybody that it was a Ming example. They didn't even know what this mark was at the time this vase was made, I suspect. 1840, 1850. There was no scholarship to speak of on Ming ceramics in the West. So why would they put a Ming mark on a piece of Western ceramics? Well, it would probably just send it up there because it was the guy that was doing the marks, and he threw it on there for the heck of it. Maybe he had a sense of humor, who knows. But at any rate, you have this very similar foot that you've seen on the other examples. You notice it comes up, there's a nicely trimmed ridge, it goes down, it slopes down. This doesn't have the outward edge, a sort of long slope. This one is more even because it's a vase, it's a bigger piece, and the foot rim comes up like this on both sides and then tapers down and then goes vertical. And when it goes vertical, you get it's all glazed. And around here again, you see a slight hint of iron oxide, and there's the texture of that paste. But it should always keep in mind that if the foot looks good, the rest of the piece should be consistent with what you expect it to be. And it should look of this quality of work. Now, anybody who collects 19th century or has collected 19th century Chinese rose mandarin and famille rose enamels will instantly recognize that this is an authentic example. There's no question about it. It's just curious that it has the mark on it. But you need to study these colors, study the facial expression, study the gold in the hair, which should be there always, even if it's just a trace of it, because the modern piece is just like a flat black paint they use. And they don't particularly shape the hair very well on the newer pieces. But you want to look for that, and you want to look for little things, the details in the robes, and the crispness and cleanness of the enamels, the clean colors. All right, and then over to this. This is a mid-19th century piece from Famille Rose. Many of you have had these before, these tatsas that are done like baskets with insects and flowers in each little partition. There's some gilding here. You notice the gilding, there's a bit of wear to it, which is normal. And when you flip the thing over, there you have the Qing mark. It's probably a Qing bowl or slightly later. But I'm not gonna spend a lot of time opining whether it's actually Qing or just after Qing, because there's so many pieces out there that get debated. It's not worth the time. But I want to discuss is this is what it should look like, and pay close attention to the color of this green in the bottom, the tone of it, because they use it today still on copies, and often the tone is too blue or it's too light. They seem to have trouble getting this color right. And you want to be very, very careful if you see it. Is it an old one or not? And you want to look for other areas that confirm the age. And on this piece, you see a number of things on the unglazed part of this foot. One, it's flat. It's been trimmed nicely and very flatly. You'll notice the glaze comes right up to the edge of it, because this isn't a raised foot like with the peacock. This is one of the, they just occasionally did them with flat feet too. And but you'll see there's a little iron spot up here, and there's a creaminess to the glaze. And you'll notice that in a couple of places the interior glaze, a little bit of it got on the bottom right there. And that's not unusual. It does happen. It absolutely happens. And it's something you want to sort of look for. And there's the mark on the bottom. And you can see there's a slight bevel on the top here, right where it has to meet the foot. So the artist went around and he trimmed a slight bevel to transition from the wall to the flat bottom. And there's this little slight transition area right there. And it doesn't go all the way around. He's got it in most places. I think he might have been doing it sort of quickly and may have missed in a few spots. But notice the texture of the paste. It's a bit uneven. It's a little ivory in color almost. It's not snow white. The modern stuff tends to be very, very white because they have very, very clean clay they could work with. And then it's got some dirt and bits of legitimate looking wear and so forth. These rose enamels on the side are good looking. And you see here where the light is hitting, you're getting a hint of orange peel, which is perfectly normal. That's what you want to see. All right. So again, 19th century, mid 19th century. And here's another example, very similar in age to the piece we were just looking at, a Famille Rose shaped rim bowl with a precious scroll and diaper patterns and Greek key borders and all that. But again, notice there are slight variations in the colors here. The enamels are rather appealing. It's a little out of focus because this one's on a high-res image, but I want to show the color tones. The colors on here are quite good as far as being a good representation. These are the color tones. They should never be muddy looking. They should never be especially bright. They shouldn't be, if you see a hot lemon yellow, be very, very leery on these. All right. And here's the bottom of it. And here's one where you see, now they didn't get this one, they shaped the foot more. All right. It's not a completely flat foot. They shaped it a bit. And they did do them this way also. You get the same mark. And you notice there's more of the green glaze from the bottom getting onto here, and there's a little bit of kiln grit and so forth. Whoever finished this one was not quite as tidy on the bottom as the other guy was. The other guy was a better trimmer. So you get these variations. Well, this is what it can look like too. It's a little irregular. The foot is more or less rounded. You can see the facet here across the bottom where the trim tool went, and it's sort of, but in other places you can't. But then it goes up and over and drops into the bottom, and again, fairly vertical inner wall. Not as vertical as the other one, but it's still there. And you have these little bits of imperfections and dirt and kiln grit and whatnot in there, all perfectly good. You shouldn't object to seeing that at all. But this is what the older examples look like. The new pieces, they tend not to do that. They tend to be a little too perfect for their own good. But that's what this bowl looks like on the bottom. All right, and then hopping along over to this, let's see here. Hold on a second. There we go. This blue and white vase. This is done in the Qing style, obviously, but it's a 19th century example. Here's a picture of the bottom of it. We'll come back over here for a minute. Now, the thing to realize is the color of this is pretty good. And these kinds of vases often, people send them in to me, and they think they're Qing because the color is good. The cobalt is if you're mistaken this for Qing, your eyes are okay. You just haven't seen enough Qing pieces yet to be able to see the subtle difference. And these pieces were sold as Qing like crazy back in the early 20th century to people. A lot of museums ended up with these. There were a lot of things that were bought by institutions due to a lack of knowledge and a lack of seeing things, and collected by exuberant rich guys and women back between 1890 and 1930 that a lot of it ended up in museums, and the museums had to go around later and get rid of them. But they had lots and lots and lots of vases like these were given to them, and it took a while for them to figure out which ones were real and which one weren't, because a lot of the people around then that were the experts had some ideas that weren't really true because they were being told things that weren't true by some people in China, dealers. People were misleading them. The famous Hobson, who was the keeper of ceramics, he was a brilliant guy, but he had things in his book that were just, we know now, are inaccurate. It wasn't willful on his part. That was just based on the knowledge they had at the time. And here you have this very nicely done vase. good-looking colors. You have an official being rolled along in his chair. You have lots of nice details and the cobalt trailing off and so forth. But when you flip the piece over, you see this bottom. And this is not a Qing bottom. It's the texture of the clay is wrong. It's not tight and firm and hard enough. And we're going to look at some Qing porcelains in the next video, and I'll show you. There's an iron oxide spot here, and there's a texture to the foot that's not beautifully smoothed. There's a little coarseness to it, and you'll notice the way it tapers here. You have that outer wall the way it's trimmed, and then here you have this nice sort of long slope to the inside, and then drops straight down to the foot. You'll notice here that it's pretty much vertical. From the edge of the unglazed area to the bottom of the piece. And then you have the big double circle with nothing in the middle. And that happens a lot on these. People often think the double circle with nothing in the middle, they forget to put it on there. No, they just actually use them. I think they just use them as decoration sometimes. It was something that vases had on them, and if they didn't bother putting a mark on it, they didn't bother putting the mark on it. All right, and then hopping over here to this. This is a pair of vases. I had these a number of years ago. I sold them to somebody, and I thought they were awfully pretty. Blue ground enamels. These are 19th century, but very nice quality decoration, obviously. But notice the crispness. The colors were nice and crisp. The colors on here were appealing. They weren't muddy. The details were nicely done, and they weren't really a true pair. They were a close pair. They were sort of an assembled pair. The one on the left is slightly taller than the one on the right, and they have different border decorations at the bottom. This one is a Greek key, and this is a diamond border. But when you flip them over, the bases were the same. So I suspect they came out of the same factory. They just got sort of mismatched on the way out the door. They both have Qing marks on them. These are not Qing vases. They didn't make this style of vase of the Qing period. That's the other thing you always want to verify when you're sort of new and looking at things, is the style and form and shape. It's got a certain mark on it. Does that make sense for the period? Was that shape ever used in that period for that type of porcelain? Yes or no? And were those colors used? I've lost track how many people have sent me Famille Rose Ming Dynasty vase pictures. And I have to write back and say, well, this color didn't exist in the Ming Dynasty. And they didn't know, only because they're new at buying this stuff. So, it's an innocent enough mistake. But you have to take all the elements into account and then make your decision on how old something is. Now, when you look at the bottom of this, the Qing mark is rather indifferently done. Those of you who've seen a lot of the marks, you'll notice here that in the glaze, there's a very nice natural-looking orange peel, though. In the foot rim, it's fully rounded on both of them. They're very similarly trimmed. They're a bit dirty, obviously, but this is what they look like, and you have this very nice, smooth, flat inner wall, not too dissimilar from the hat stand we looked earlier, but the bottom of the foot is trimmed slightly differently. This is a variation on that other one. Okay, there are lots and lots and lots of varieties, but you have to take it all into account. So you got the Qing mark, the way it's done. On the copies today, they wouldn't do them this way. They would actually make them look very, very realistic to the period. This is not how they did them in the Qing period. And this palette and colors and all that weren't really used on vases at the time either. So it's a 19th century vase, mid to late 1850, 1880 vases, but very attractive. And but that's what the bottoms of these look like. You have a little separation line here where the glaze crept slightly, and that's something you do. It's a bit of a comfort to see that because you don't see it too often on new pieces because they're able to control the glaze so well. And you'll notice that the orange peel here and there and little bits of impurities don't seem to be planned or put in there to deceive anybody. And then over to this. So these just sold. I just happen to like them a lot. I put them on the Patreon page. Very nice pair of Famille June with Famille Rose decoration vases rather. Notice the quality of the Famille Rose enameling here and here. Very nicely done. Very delicately done all the way around. These vases had a phenomenal amount of detail in them. And I think somebody got a steal on them, by the way. I thought they went very, very reasonably. A couple of $1,000 with including the buyer's premium. And these were big. They were 24 inches tall or so. But very nicely done. Very appealing yellow. Lots of detail. Crisp, clean colors. And then when you flip them over, this is what these look like on the bottom. Now, these aren't as dirty as some of the other ones, so you can see the paste better, actually. But again, you can see the trimming on it. You can see the trim, where they use the knife to trim the foot off the bottom when they have it on the wheel, and they're cleaning it up a little bit, and you get this nice rounded, somewhat semi-faceted foot that's unglazed from there to here, and then it's glazed, and then goes straight down. Nice straight wall right down to the bottom of the vase. Same thing on this. You'll notice the similarities. It looks like they tried to clean these. This is like dried water on here, but this is what they look like. And you will see irregularities and differences in foot rims too. Like here, you have a pair. But this part of the foot rim looks very different from this part of the foot rim. These are both ways they can appear. They can appear either way. They're, like I said at the beginning, there's no set way they must appear. So always keep that in mind, okay? And these were very attractive. And then this bowl, 19th century bowl, Daoguan period, very attractive. I forget where this came from. It was very attractive though. But nice enamels, nice gilding, the apricot ground, nice detail in the gilding around here. I like the way the delicate flowers are done in this very pure white background. And notice here on the gilding, little spots of natural looking wear along the gilt edge, because gilding wears quickly, as we've talked about so many times. And down here at the bottom, and notice how the edge of the foot rolls under slightly and all that. And then when you click over and look at the mark, you've of course got the Daoguan mark, which is perfectly well done. It should be. And you have the foot, and you have a little bit of sort of iron oxide, almost like blushing, coming through the white paste here. But this very nice rounded, very smooth, quite white, quite pure foot with little hints of impurities in it. But also look at the way the mark is done, light and dark areas, touch marks. If you look at a Daoguan mark and it's just a solid blue and there's no color variation at all, be suspicious of it. In other words, if it's all the same tone of dark blue, where it doesn't look like, because when an artist applies his brush to draw a mark, where it touches is going to be dark, because that's a concentration of cobalt, and as you go down, it begins to consume the cobalt in the stroke going down, so it may lighten and thin a little bit on the way down. As you see here, this like there's a touch mark, and then it gets lighter up here. Here you have a nice dark touch mark, and then it gets lighter and lighter as you go in. And all these little variations you do want to see. They're not in themselves a confirmation of authenticity, but they're an indication of authenticity. And you need to add up all of the indications to come up with an absolute decision after you've looked over the piece for enough time and had enough similar examples to compare it to. All right, but this is a lovely Daoguan example, and looked fine. And then this, another rose mandarin teapot with a cracked ice pattern in yellow on here, strap handle, very well-known type, made around 1840 to 1850, a part of a big service, no doubt. And here's the bottom of it. Very nicely done. This is, again, pre-1850, I'm going to bet, because it's the finish work on it is so good. You don't see any kiln grit, for example. The foot is neatly trimmed. The paste is nice and clean. There is some dirt on here and whatnot. But notice how nice and smooth that outer wall is when he trimmed this. And it's very smooth on the inside. Very nicely done. Very level, very even. And the bottom of it's very evenly glazed, surprisingly so. But this is absolutely fine. It's an authentic example. And go back to it for a second. And this is what it should look like. And again, the colors are vibrant. And it doesn't matter whether it's rose mandarin or rose medallion or some other type of Chinese porcelain from the 19th century. The colors should be crisp and clean like this. It doesn't mean that it's only on rose medallion and rose mandarin or whatever. It can be on the Wangshu Pu pieces. It can be on landscape scenes. It can be on Chinese domestic wares. The enamels are the enamels. Famille rose is famille rose in the 19th century and in the 18th century. But you want to look at the colors, the greens, this very, 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 very pretty celery green that was very popular and so forth. And again, you have this rust ground, orange ground area with a little bit of slightly yellowed enamels that they would swish back and forth to make it look like a terrace. So that's one of the things you want to look for. And then over to this double happiness jar with butterflies on it. This is a very, very pretty jar. And beautifully done butterflies. And butterfly pattern things during the second half of the 19th century were extremely popular, and they make lots of copies of them today, especially those famous Guangzhou butterfly vases. We're going to take a look at one at the end of this, so stick around for it, because it's a real one. It looks good. But here's the bottom of it. Again, Tongqi. Again, you have this nicely finished hand-done foot. And it's a little bit dirty. This is pretty dirty on the inside, but you'll see again this foot that comes up and goes over, trimmed neatly, and then glazed up to the edge, and then goes down into the inside. And all, as I said, all the elements need to add up. So you need to look at this, and then look at the piece overall, and does it add up? Does this add up? Yeah, that adds up nicely. That adds up beautifully. Natural wear on the gilding. The butterflies are detailed. The potting, the shape of it, is sort of a Jadao shape, like a spittoon. They started making the shape in the Ming Dynasty. Very, very nicely done, with a double happiness mark, with the pair of butterflies over it. And this, of course, is the symbol. Double happiness is a symbol of marital fidelity. Very, very attractive. And then again, you have another one of these rose mandarin plates. Now, this is the first half of the 19th century example. And when we talked before, I said, look, always check the rim. How muddy is it? Is it muddy looking? And this is what it looks like. This is how they did them during sort of the end of the Qing and early Daoguan period. Very detailed, very crisp, very neat, very orderly, lots of nice colors. And then when you flip this over, you have that there. You have that sloped outer foot going up and then dropping down. There you have it, right there. Now, this is very high quality clay. You notice how white it is, all right? Because the clay quality was the kaolin they had then on these earlier pieces, the first half of the 19th century, they often cleaned the clay better, so you don't have all the iron oxide impurities that you got a little bit later. But here you have it. Very nice white clay, nicely trimmed on the foot, and then it sort of drops down into the center. And then you have some little droplets of glaze and things that got on there. But again, always check the reflection where light is hitting it. This is what the orange peel should look like on the back of one of these from this period. If it's very, very wavy looking, like a lake, be suspicious. It's probably a reproduction. But if the waves in the glaze are just slightly there and a bit irregular, it usually indicates they're okay. It's okay. All right, and then you have this, again, another famille rose vase. Again, mid-19th century, in the 1840s, very nicely done gilt shimmers and foo lions on it, and this beautifully done bird. But notice the colors. The colors are good. The lighting on this is terrible. I have to apologize for that a little bit. But I like the shape of the vase. I like the Greek key, sort of archaic, not a Greek key, but archaic border. And again, you have this nice layering of the famille rose enamels and so forth, ruffled rim. 1840 to 1850, somewhere in there, I would think. And there's the bottom of it. All right. Nicely done. And again, the moon flask we saw at the beginning, it was sort of thick and heavily done and very dirty. Well, here's a thick one again. All right. It's not as dirty, though, but it's the same idea. It's the same idea, sort of a heavy foot. And this one was on a little bit earlier piece, but it was more refined in its finish. But this was probably because it was a vase and they wanted to give it a good stout foot. You'll notice a little dots of impurities through the middle here, a hint of wave, orange peel, but not going all over the place, very natural looking. And you have this glaze that comes up and doesn't finish straight all the way around. And this is something you do see. You'll see here the foot is unglazed down to here, but it's fully glazed to the top over here. And that's because when they did it, they weren't paying too much attention to it, I suspect, and they got it semi-even on there when they applied it. But this is what they can look like. And again, you have this nicely trimmed, rounded foot. They did a very good job of smoothing this down, though, after they trimmed it. It looks quite smooth there and so forth. But this is another example, and also these very nice little black dots under here that come from the firing process, which you shouldn't worry about seeing. If it looks completely smooth and white and you have suspicions about how the decoration looks, you want to run for your life. All right, and then over to this, the biscuit decorated foo lions. Now, these were done like Kangxi examples, but these weren't Kangxi. These were either late 18th or early 19th century. I'm including them as early 19th century because I suspect they're probably from the Qing period, but they were very nicely done. They're a little yellower. The photo makes them look a little yellower than they really were because I handled these. But they were very, very nice, and they were quite large. They're about 14 inches tall, but done in the Kangxi manner. And you have the daddy foo lion on the right with the ball, and the mama foo lion on the left with the baby foo lion climbing up her arm. and the head and the eyes on this moved. If these were on little counter levers, and if you move them, the eyes would rock back and forth. But notice the translucency of the yellow on here. It's very, very nice. The aubergine was very, very thin. On the Qing examples, the yellow would have been a bit stronger, and the aubergine would have been a bit stronger as well. Here, they were a little bit thinner. And there's a picture of the bottom of them with the vent holes and so forth, the texture of the clay. They were kind of dirty, but you can see the texture of it, and you can see that the bottoms of them were fairly thick. When you pick up these food lines in objects like this also, if the clay on the bottom, the paste on the bottom is paper thin, and it looks almost like a thin piece of glass, it's so thin. It's very, very thin. Generally assume it's a later piece. But on the older ones, they made the bottoms, they gave them a fairly thick slab of clay, like these. These had nice, thick bottoms to them. That was probably a little over a 1/4 inch in thickness. They were very, very nice, and I ended up selling them to somebody in China. But here's another detail of it there, and notice how the glaze sort of creeps irregularly around the edge. And you can see where the guy, whoever it was, he trimmed it. He put a slight bevel on the edge of this foot. But the texture of the paste is very, very consistent with 19th century paste. All right, and then over to this. This was a Guangzhou Qing that we had a few years ago. Interestingly, a guy I know found this in the attic of a house in Maine. He was renovating, and it was ripping the walls out, and this was behind the wall. He brought it down to me, and I loved it. It was a good one. Nice, clear celadon color. Very good color on this. Excellent color. And it is a Guangzhou Marken period vase, and there's the bottom of it. This was after it was cleaned. It was very, very dirty. The foot was almost black when I got it, and I just used a little soap and water and a toothbrush, and this is how it came out. There's the mark on the bottom. Looks absolutely fine. Notice the paste. The white this is cleaned. It's not completely pure white the way modern paste can look. It's got some discoloration to it. And that's normal. That's completely normal. The mark was beautifully done, and it was an excellent example. And this is what they look like. But be very careful. They're producing a lot of copies of these Qings now. You want to pay close attention to how the shoulders are done. This one had a little tiny area where the glaze didn't take, and it blushed with a little tiny bit of iron oxide on it. But that was about it. Other than that, it was a perfect glaze, and it was beautifully done all the way down, but you want to be very, very careful, because they're making piles of copies of these and piles of copies of Guangzhou marks. All right, I happen to know where this one came from, so I know it wasn't new the minute I saw it. And then this was a tea dust glaze Guangzhou Marken period vase. This was one that actually belonged to my mother-in-law. And we sold it a number of years ago because nobody in the family wanted to keep it. I liked it, but you know, you have to sell things once in a while. And here's a picture of the bottom. And that's how they do the marks on these very often. They have the tea dust glaze area around the mark, and then the mark is done on a panel with a clear, smooth glaze. All right, and this is the foot on it. Looks completely natural, very nicely trimmed, very orderly, very nicely done though, with a nice little bit of wear on the lowest point where it contacted surfaces all of its life. See this white area? That's from resting on its stand for many, many years, and that's how it came out. All right, and you'll notice here there's a shift in color from the side to the inside. But that's what the bottom of one of these should look like. If you see one of these and it's got this goofy brown dressing they seem to be affixed on with a Guangzhou mark, be suspicious of it. And if you see it with a snow white bottom, snow white foot that looks absolutely perfect, and you don't see any of these sorts of irregularities, be a little suspicious as well. All right, because they're making lots of copies of tea dust pieces, and they tend not to have a golden color. Some of them have they can range in color. They can go from eel skin to very dark green. They can have lots of color variation. On this one, you'll notice it had lots of color variation on the neck and down over the body, little spots and areas and so forth. Tea dust glaze can come in many, many, many varieties, but this is one that has a slight bit of yellow in it. It was quite attractive. And oh yeah, here's a side view of the foot. There it is. I did have that. And you notice there's a slight gap at the end of the glaze before the foot starts. And you can see this little tiny ridge from the trimming tool when he cleaned this foot up. Whoever did it did a really good job. This is a beautiful porcelain. And then over to this, again, another 19th century famille rose vase with Mandarin figures on it. entering it's a, official entering or returning to a palace, chimeras and so forth, 19th century. Very, very attractive. And there's the foot on this. Now, this one I sold, and it was very dirty, and I cleaned it because the people buying it wanted to see the foot cleaned. So that's what it looks like. Again, that thick foot that we saw in the first vase, it was so dark, this is what it would look like underneath if you really, really went to town and cleaned it off. If you get that, if it wasn't all impurities, this is what it would look like. Very nicely glazed, nice, neat line up the inside, and this nicely rounded foot. All right, but keep in mind also the colors. All of this is correct as well. Always compare the outside, compare the underside. All right, and then this very attractive pair of ruffled rim small vases. These are late 19th century, 1890s to 19. They could even conceivably be early Republic because of the coloration, but they're nicely done. Sort of Daotsai, Wutsai. It's sort of a mix of enamels. They did mix them sometimes, but this one has some nice elements to it. I like them. These weren't terribly big. I think these are about 10 inches tall or something. And there's a picture of the bottom. Again, very, very similar feet, but a bit rustic, a bit crude. And as I said, sometimes in the later vases, they didn't finish them up quite as well as they did in the earlier periods. This is what I mean. There's a little choppiness here in the foot, but the paste is pretty good quality. But again, the foot was not trimmed with the same amount of care that we saw on those earlier pieces that were done in the 1830s and 40s and so forth. This is a bit cruder, and that is something that you will see, but they're still nicely finished, and that is what they should look like. But again, the colors are also good. The enamels, anybody that has been collecting for a while will know right away by looking at these enamels, they're absolutely the way they should look. All right. And then this, the big Femi-Vert Kangxi. This is a vase. It's not Kangxi, but it's done in the Kangxi style, obviously. This was one that we sold some time ago. I thought it was a very nice example. Beautifully potted, good colors, nice detail all the way around. I'm sorry, it's not quite as crisp as I would want it. There we go. But the colors are good. Notice the green is clean. It's a good, clean, dark green. The red is nicely done. And all of this, these are all colors right out of the Kangxi playbook. The decoration is a little bit different in places, but the color and overall appearance and impression obviously is one of it's trying to be Kangxi. And we sold it as a mid-19th century example. There's the bottom of it. And now the bottom of this is very nicely done. A number of you are going to notice that. You're going to say, well, that was a pretty good-looking foot. It is a good-looking foot. It was beautifully finished. This was a high-quality vase. You'll see a little bit of dirt and a few impurities up here in this yellow area. But this is not what a Kangxi foot should look like. That's the only problem. It's too fat, it's too round, and the texture of the paste doesn't look right. And so forth, and this funny little ridge, the way this is done on the inside, but very nicely finished. You'll notice some people say, well, if the glaze stops perfectly above the foot, it's Kangxi. No, that doesn't mean that at all. It just means it was made by a good potter, and they had good potters in the 19th century. This example has a very nice even line, but doesn't make it Kangxi. It just makes it of a high quality vase, and you also have this rosing up in here, which again is that iron oxide effect we've talked about over and over. So you want to keep that in mind. But this was a nice vase. This was I think this vase was about 20 inches tall. It was very, very attractive. All right, and there's nothing wrong with it. And then over to this is another 19th century vase done in Femi-Vert that is sort of trying to be Kangxi, and it's got the basket of flowers in the middle and so forth inside of a pomegranate that's holding it. And the enamels are nice, but they're a little too stiff. They're a little too stiffly done, but they're good, clean colors. The colors are good. They're not gonna. This vase wouldn't fool a collector into thinking it was Kangxi, but it would absolutely let you know that it's 19th century. And this is the kind of work they did in the 19th century. It's very, very nice. But you study the colors, study the drawing style, and so forth. The potting and all this is very, very nice. And when you flip the piece over, there's the bottom of it. Very typical of 19th century foot rims. And you have this rounded edge to it that you also see on Kangxi pieces, but usually there's some fritting in here and whatnot. But then you have this very squared foot with these little dark areas because the clay wasn't as tight. It was not as tight and as compact as the Kangxi clay. It was a little looser, and so it looks like it's got almost like sand in it. And it's because the little bits of dirt get into it because it's not completely smooth. All right, and if you pull up down in here, you'll notice the slight yellowish tone there on the inside, and a few impurities on the bottom and so forth. But this is obviously a 19th century piece with this flat foot and the way it's decorated. So you look at the bottom, 19th century bottom, and then you look at the face, very consistent. Looks Kangxi, but the decoration, if you compare it to Kangxi vases, won't hold up. And the shape would be very atypical too. That's the other thing. I think they actually did them in this shape periodically, but not commonly. All right, and then over to this ram's head jar. This particular type of jar became really popular during the Qing period, but not with the white slip, white enamels and blue enamels on it. This was a early 19th century jar. It was fairly large. This thing was about 15 inches tall. And the ram's heads were beautifully done. Jing to Daoguan period, I think, judging by the workmanship. Nicely finished, thick glaze, clean glaze, but it has these white enamels over the celadon, which was done with some regularity in the 19th century. And there's a picture of the bottom of it. This one happened to have a Yongchen mark on it. It's not Yongchen, but it is 19th century, clearly. And again, you have this very nicely finished foot with that slope to it on the outside, on the inside rather, and a bit of a slope on the outside. The angle of the camera doesn't, I wished I'd shot this picture at more of a pitch, but nice flat bottom that's been trimmed in here after it was, so they beveled one side, they beveled the inside, and then the potter very nicely went around it and cleaned up that foot rim so it would stand evenly. It had an old repair to it, by the way. It had a repair down in here. You can see some of it. And it was fixed a long time ago. It was fixed in the 20s. And actually, the repair held up quite well. But at any rate, that's it. The Yongchen mark didn't mean a thing. As you can, those of you who are familiar with Yongchen marks would know right instantly by looking at this that this is definitely not the way it would have been done. It was way too sloppy, way too indifferent. The artwork was terrible on it. But they conveyed the point that they were trying to do was make a copy of a Yongchen vase. Again, very typical, very, very typical. And then here's that Guangxu period vase I was talking about with the butterflies. You see tons of these on the market. They do turn up periodically. Be extremely careful around them. They are most of the time, 99 out of 100 of the ones that you see on the market are copies. Literally 99 out of 100. But when you look at this one very carefully, this I believe sold at Christie's. You look at the detail of the butterflies. And there's a certain randomness, sense of motion that they have. There was the famous pair of butterfly vases with the loop handles that sold. They were 18th century Qinlong examples that sold for $15 or $20 million years ago, and they were sort of the litmus test for the popularity of the butterfly pattern, I guess. And they weren't a match pair. They were what they referred to as a complementary pair. But this is a very nicely. These butterflies are particularly well done. Lots of detail in them, and they have a sense of flight to them. If you sort of squint your eyes, they almost look like they could just move around. And the newer ones are very stiff and angular looking, and when you look at the butterfly wings themselves, they don't have all the little details you expect to see. So if you encounter one of these, go find one that's been sold that's authentic or is that's in a museum or major auction house, and study the butterflies. And you'll see the difference. The new copies, the butterflies are not as well done, and then when you flip the thing over, the foot rims are often don't look quite right. Now here you have it. Here you have the foot on this thing, very nicely done. A couple of minor little iron spots in here. There's a slight grainy texture in the paste because it's not quite as dense as the 18th century paste, but very nicely finished. Super finish on it. The mark, of course, is perfect. And then you have this nice rounded foot, this inner wall glazed, beautifully going sort of straight down to the bottom of the piece. And the bottom, and this is slightly convex. Lifts off just slightly. Because the bottoms of these tend to be very thick, so they didn't sag much in the kiln. But notice also this very appealing yellow tone on the lap around the bottom. That's also a sign of it. If it gets too lemony, it's usually a copy, but this has a little bit of orange in it, just a hint. And the subtle differences in color are what makes the difference here. And all the colors should be very harmonious. They should all work together, no matter what it is you're looking at. And this is a nice example. Nice example. All right, and then over to this lime green ground affair. I think this was a Daoguan example that was at Christie's or Sotheby's. But notice the quality of the enameling. This is a American period vase, so the quality is going to be really super on it. And this work in here, this little area, this little famille rose area, really focus in on that. And notice how delicate the shading is. Now, this is not paint they're applying. They're applying enamels, which have to fire and crystallize, and how they were able to get this level of shading in. And over here on these flowers here, and then the branches of the tree and all these little elements point you in the right direction. And then you have this very nice green, not too dissimilar from the green that you saw on 19th century rose medallion and rose mandarin. Green is green. All right, but this was a very nice soft green enameled lime ground piece with flowers, spring flowers. Here's another detail of it. I want to really get in here and look at this. And you can see the phenomenal amount of detail in this one flower, just this one. And over here you can see it. They use white enamels and pink enamels on a white ground. And notice all the little details. Lots and lots of details, gently outlined in a slightly grayish ink, and then filled in with green. Very, very attractive, beautiful thing. And there's the bottom of it there, the Daoguan mark. And again, you have that foot nicely finished, beveled on the outside, beveled on the inside, flat bottom. The wear is where it should be. I saw some vases recently where the bottom of the vase, the foot had no wear at all, but the sides of the vase, the foot rim had wear to it because they rubbed it down with some sort of abrasion to make it look like natural wear. Well, it had wear where it would never have wear. So it was sort of a strange phenomenon. But here you have this very nice Daoguan foot. And again, nice detail in here. A little bit of grit, a little seam here where the enamels meet the unglazed foot and so forth. But natural looking wear all the way around. Very, very natural. And the mark is slightly light in color, but certainly looks fine otherwise. And now this one, you have that bluish color on the bottom again. There was another color, that green that we saw on the Tongchi pieces. This is a blue tone that you sometimes will see. Like it's like the inside of a boat. Those of you that have boats, Boston Whaler blue. That's the color. It's a very pleasing light blue tone. New England houses, they often painted the roof of the front porch this color. It's a universally pleasing color, but that's a very good example. And then the basin, again, this is about the end, folks. The basin, they just dated this as Qing, probably Jing period or so. And there was one of these recently that was submitted to me that I didn't like, and I'll show you why in a second. You'll notice on the bottom here, these old basins, they didn't have feet on them, and they glazed them fully, and they had these spur marks. They were fired up on spurs sometimes. But what they do end up with is wear around the outside of that rim, because the center of this is concave rather. So the center of this bowl will never touch a tabletop. It's slightly curved up, but the foot rim will be in contact because it has to rest on something, and there you can find natural wear. And if you see one of these that has absolutely no wear anywhere around here, and it doesn't look natural to you, and you have suspicions, you're probably looking at a really good copy. But this was a nice example. Very, very well done, emulating cloisonné. It's porcelain, but they were sort of emulating cloisonné work. And you'll notice there's little bit of damage there, a little split in the enamels and so forth. There's a very soft orange peel in the reflection and so forth. This was a nice basin though. It looked perfectly fine. And it had this bottom with a little touches of wear here and there, all looking very, very natural. All right, and then the last thing here is this deer vase, 100 deer vase with the Qinlong mark on the bottom. Not a Qinlong vase, obviously, but beautifully done. This is a late Qing example. I don't know if they sold it as late Qing or Republic. I don't think this is Republic. I think it's much more likely just a very good late Qing piece. The deer, all the animals are beautifully detailed on it. A lot of the copies that when they make the modern reproductions, they do not get the details of the deer. The deers tend to be too fat and heavy looking. These are still have long, elegant necks, very slinky, long legs, nice details of the spots on their fur and so forth, and interestingly posed in all their different places. And then you have the mountains and the rocks, good detail all through the rocks. This was a very nice example. It was a later example. It wasn't Qinlong. It was later, but very, very attractive. And this is the bottom of it. Qinlong mark, late Qing Republic sort of execution of the mark. And there's the foot. To me, this is not a Republic vase. I would very heavily point as late 1880s, 1890s, something like that. But nicely finished. There's some discoloration under here, which happened on the late Qing examples. But there you have it. And again, you have that nice little edge line, and again that nicely done foot rim. But it's been cut and beveled and then flattened and so forth. All right. And that's a good example. All right, and here's a detail of the deer. I just wanted to show this one more time. Look at the detail. If you look at the one in white enamel actually has an expression on the horned examples here, and in this one too, sort of smiling over at the artist. You'll spot these things, and these two sort of parallel, standing together, looking off, fixated on something in the distance, and here you have them rather animated. And one over here looks like it's drinking out of a stream. Yeah, it's a waterfall, and you see the water swirling around the nose of the deer. Those kinds of little details you don't find on the brand new copies that are out there. You just don't see them. All right. And then the last is one of these peach faces. This is a late Qing to Republic period copy. The peaches are too heavy. They're not glowing. They look like opaque red enamels. And the foot rim on it is rather heavy and clunky, flat-bottomed, and so forth. And you'll notice the mark; it's completely even. There's no touch mark. There's no nothing. It's just a red mark. And this is a very, very, very late Qing. It could be Republic too, but it's. I don't think it's brand new. But it's clearly not Qinlong mark and period, and the mark shouldn't really be in red anyway. It should be in blue, as most of you know, on 99% of them. And the wear on the foot looks fine, but it's too thick, it's too heavy to be Qinlong, and so forth. And and this is the very last one. Is one of these. We all see these all the time. This is one of these 1890s examples with underglazed blue crackle, and then these brown dressed foo lions on the neck and a little brown dressing around here, and then the bottom of it has the Ming mark, again with that very, very similar looking foot rim, beveled, trimmed. It's dirty. This is dirt. This is mostly dirt. And then the brown dressing on the Chenhua mark on the base. It's not a Chenhua vase, obviously. This is a late, very, very late 19th century example, but legitimate. All right. And I keep thinking this is the last one. Is this the last one? Is this Celadon vase with Famille Rose. Nicely done. And by at this point, many of you will be able to look at it and say when this was made. About 1840, 1830. Beautiful quality, nicely finished. Big foot though, big foot on this, but again, all beveled and cleaned up. And then on this example, they didn't get much glaze up on this part on the sidewall coming in, but down here they did. And this variation is very encouraging. You want to see that from time to time. All right. So that about covers it. All right. There are many different examples. This is sort of a classic foot rim of the period. And once you learn to spot these, going ahead, you'll be able to spot them everywhere. You won't be fooled by the foot rims that look too clunky and too modern, and the foot is too flush to the bottom of the vase and all that. And then, of course, you can always go by the colors, and the colors of this vase are very, very appealing. The gilding is still intact. The enamels are nicely done. The colors are crisp. And these are all the things you should look for. These are all the things that you want to keep in mind. All of the elements on a piece have to add up to arrive at a certain date. That's just how it is. So always keep that in mind. All right? All right. Thanks for watching, and we'll do part 2 soon, and it may do an addendum to some of these, but we'll get there. All righty. Thanks again, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Leave a comment. If there's anything you'd like me to add, let me know. We're going to do a few of these as I can get the pictures together and make it something interesting. All right. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.